of governance. And the financial crisis is just one dimension of it, just one element of it. The existing mechanisms that we have to tackle global issues are not working. And what I'd like to do now is just spend a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, examining with you, what are in fact some of these mechanisms of sort of global cooperation that we have to deal with crisis. And why is it that they're not working? Why is it that in fact they're ineffective by and large? And furthermore, what to do about it, which is how I want to conclude. Well, we have, for instance, treaties and conventions. This is one way in which historically we have addressed particular problems. We had the Kyoto Protocol is a very good example. Negotiated in 1997, it was finally ratified in 2005, and the United States, as you know, was not part of it. So the problem with treaties and conventions is they're basically too slow for urgent problems. They have very lax or slow enforcement, and so not many people think that they are really up to the task of addressing global problems. Which is not to say that we shouldn't have this conference in Copenhagen in December. I think we should, and the more ambitious targets that we come out of that conference with, the better. But in general, treaties and conventions, are not adequate, to deal with the urgency of the problems that we have today. There have been, and I hope I will not offend anybody here, there have been, of course, over the past decade, a number of UN intergovernmental conferences on a broad range of issues. We had on the environment in Rio in 1992, and 10 years later in South Africa. We had the social summit in Copenhagen in 95, the conference on women in Beijing. We had human rights in Vienna, population in Cairo, and so on and on and on and on. The problem with these is that, I think that they're very good for raising awareness, but actually they're not effective at all for solving problems. They're kind of very ritualistic, and they basically, are long on declarations, and there is no follow-up. Or when there is a follow-up, like there was in 2002 in South Africa, it's essentially to lament what wasn't done during the previous years since Rio, which is, again, not a very, good state of affairs. The G7, was in the mid-70s, sort of created as a way of, confronting some of these global problems. In fact, if you look at the communiqué that gave rise to the G7, or announced the creation of the G7, it's kind of sensible. It says that it's to discuss major economic and political issues facing their domestic societies and the international community as a whole. Well, it sounds like a very good idea. But what has the G7 actually done, and how has it evolved over time? It's very perturbing. There are issues of process. The communiques of these G7 meetings are negotiated weeks before the actual meeting takes place. So in fact, there is no brainstorming. When they get together, it's not in the spirit of Bretton Woods of 1944. If you go back to 1944 and you actually see what happened in at the Bretton Woods conference, that was international cooperation. That was brainstorming. That was sort of consultation. That then resulted in the creation of an entirely new international financial system. Right? The G7 meetings are nothing like that. In fact, I remember reading once a couple of paragraphs of an autobiography written by James Callaghan, who was a British Prime Minister in the 1970s. You probably remember him. And Mr. Callaghan, very candidly, of course not being Prime Minister anymore, said that he had attended a number of G7 summits, and that the purpose of the G7 summits was to preserve the status quo. They got together basically to do that, which is to do nothing, unless my understanding of what the status quo is conceived. It basically means you do nothing. Well, we don't want to have an organization or a body that does nothing, because we have many problems that need addressing. Of course, it has other problems as well. It's an official body, so there is an issue of legitimacy. Where is the business community? Where is civil society represented? Nowhere. Then we have the multilaterals, the UN agencies and programs, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, and so on and so forth. And these are fine organizations. I think that they all do excellent work. They don't always get it right, but they do excellent work, and they have good